Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for attending. It seems a bit echoey in here because there's not very many of us. Mike's going to start us off, actually. Mike works in the GRC team within DWP, and we've very much, as Anna said, we've been part of the GRC journey for the last 3 years. We've using metric stream to enable us on that journey. And Mike, for many of his sins, is a project manager, amongst other things, within DWP to help us embed a GRC culture into the department. So, Mike, I'll start you off, if that's okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike, as Jane just said, I'm Mike Scanlon, and I'm part of the GRC team in DWP. So just to kick off, DWP are actually leading supplier assurance across the government, so it's really important for us that we get this right, because we won't just be embedding this in DWP, we'll be putting this, bringing this out across government as well. So it's not just a DWP initiative, it's something for across government. We are one of the largest departments in the UK, government departments in the UK. As you can see there, we've got 83,000 staff. We're there in 750 sites, 700 of which are open to the public. So that brings other supply assurance requirements as well. And this really is about the security elements of supplier assurance. As a department, we actually spend in around £182.5 billion a year on benefits and pensions, and that's across a number of benefits, including winter fuel payments, universal credit, and pensions, and top-up for pensions as well. So it's a really considerable amount of money. With that, we spend in around £650 million. We hand out £650 million every working day to 22 million people across the UK. And what we take up there is in around 35% of UK banking activity. So what DWP does really matters, and it's really important. You can see there that we've got over 1,000 contracts above £10,000. So some of those contracts are for millions of pounds. So it says they're £10,000, but some of them are really, really weighty contracts and very, very complex contracts as well. We've got approximately 950 systems. We work with over 850 suppliers. So what we do really is quite large. Okay, so just a little bit here about why does DWP need supplier assurance? So there are a few things there that we do that we've seen in the past. What's happened with British Airways, for example, they were fined £183 million by the Information Commissioner's Office, and that is because they were breached and compromised 500,000, in around 500,000 accounts. And that in itself is massive, because it wasn't just personal information, some of it was banking information, including the 3-digit number CVVs. That really, it's such a massive impact. And with British Airways, £183 million sounds an awful lot for a fine. It's the biggest fine handed out, yes, but it could easily have been £500 million if the full 4% of turnover was imposed. Dixon's car phones there, 10 million customer records were compromised. Dixon's originally thought it was only 1.2 million, but it turned out to be 10 million records. Again, personal details there were obtained. So both there you can see British Airways and Dixon's really need to look at their security posture and improve this. And that in itself will cost them a considerable amount of money. 200% increase in cybersecurity attacks targeting the supply chain, and that's only going to grow. It's not going to decrease. The numbers aren't going to decrease. So it's so important that we do get this right within Department of Work and Pensions. Just looking here a little bit at the importance of supplier security assurance. First looking there is assurance of suppliers providing services to DWP. It's so important there that it's not just direct people that we're looking at here, so our direct suppliers. Our direct suppliers also subcontract. They have their own third parties, so we need to make sure whatever security assurance we have in place is there, not just for the third party we're working with, also for people working with them as well. Because one of the things we need to think about here is that we hold the records of in around 68 million people. So that's name, address, national insurance number, date of birth, where they live, where they've previously lived, family that they've got. So it's so important, not just from a payment aspect, but also because of the assets that we hold on 68 million people within this country, that it really is so important that we do get this right. Enable informed decision-making when selecting new suppliers, really making sure that our suppliers have got the right certifications, not just at the start of a contract, but making sure then that we go back and we assure it further on. For example, if they say that they're ISO 27001 compliant, that we check that and we verify that and we know that they've got it. If the SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, know that that's there and that can be verified and it can be attested to as well. And just looking at the final bullet point there, identity instances of exposure in existing supplier and third-party relationships. I talked a little bit earlier on about making sure that the third parties are there as well. But getting this right is huge for DWP. We won't just be doing this on our own. We'll be working with our commercial partners. We'll be working with other stakeholders within DWP. But getting this right, not only huge, but extremely important that we do protect the assets of DWP and all of the people out there as well. Thanks, Jane. So what we've got here is we've got a model, a DWP security model, and we're going to do this through three different aspects. Firstly, direct, and that really is making sure that we get the governance right. So that governance needs to be right, correct, right at the start and throughout. So make sure that we know what our strategic direction is. Are the right policies in place? Have we got the right standards there? Are we adhering to that? Then deliver, ensuring that we're collaborating properly throughout the business. So it's not just working in isolation, it's ensuring that security is there right at the very start, and security is seen as an enabler, not somebody who's going to say you can't do that. Making sure that stakeholders have got the right information, that it's properly risk assessed, and that advice is given there and then. And then finally, assure, making sure that the correct controls assurance is there, making sure that all of the correct controls are there, going back and having that, probably back to the word assurance again, really, that's what the first line have said that they've done. We've been able to go back and say, yes, I can see the evidence, that's there. And then audit coming in and auditing everything that's already been done and providing that further assurance that what the first line has done has been correct, what the second line has done has been correct, and attesting really that what we've got in place is really good. Okay, Jane's going to take the next slide.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike's already alluded to, we are the Enterprise Security Risk Management team, and in that we are a second line function for DWP. Now, we are having to work together with first line to help us get this supplier assurance in the best possible place it can be. Now, we are working with first line, supporting them, helping them. We've got members of the team working alongside them because we appreciate that they need to, for want of a better phrase, up their game a little bit. I think we've been complacent in what we're doing, and we need to make sure that we have a right level of security around our suppliers. So, you know, we're very much embedded in this GRC journey in regard to we've embedded a risk process to ensure that security is approached with a risk-based assessment for new innovation, for new systems, as well as our legacy systems, to ensure that controls are in place and managed accordingly. So supplier assurance is slightly separate to the team, but it's included because we very much want to look at the risks around supplier assurance. But again, I need to kind of emphasize here that this is very much from a security perspective. So the processes we put in place is to ensure that our suppliers are secure when they are dealing with, whether it be our data, our customers, our information, whether they're using our assets. So it's around the security implications of it. So there is another piece that our commercial teams will be doing with regard to suppliers, but we are part of it, so hence we're working alongside them and with them. So I think, you know, the new ways of working that I've talked about and what we're doing is we have to look at what the DWP objectives are. And, you know, there are high-level objectives that talk about the administration of how we deliver an effective welfare system, and that we need to reduce costs and achieve value for money. So in that, our aim is to provide assurance on the maturity of a supplier's security posture, prevent or minimise security breaches, and any associated costs to protect both information and customers. So that's our main objective with our supplier assurance model. So, you know, how do we do this? We've got to provide appropriate security due diligence on existing suppliers. So yes, there's been some work done around security of suppliers, but we've acknowledged here that we need to do more. So I think there is very much a piece of work that we've got to look at new suppliers, but then we've also got to look at the existing suppliers and what they were asked to do when their contract was signed, and if there's improvement that need to go ahead, you know, because we now know a lot more, we understand more. And this is where the GRC model comes in, that we need to look at all the areas and make sure we're not duplicating, and that we're getting value for money, and that the governance, as Mike said, is in place. So I think what feedback we've had from some of the suppliers that are already working with us is that we may not have been clear in the beginning what our requirements were. So there's very much a piece of work there, so that when we get new contracts, we are clear with our suppliers what our expectations are, what they need to do from a security perspective. So I think what I need to just say here is we've got a bit of a wiggly worm, but this is our process or an overview of our onboarding of new suppliers within to DWP. So I think for me, as a second line function, we need to be very supportive of our first line colleagues here. So, you know, we want to work closely with them, make sure that they are doing their due diligence at their level, so when a second line comes in, we can assure that everything is in place and it's very effective. So, just to give you a bit of a run through of how we do this, we have an initial triage so that, you know, if we need a new contract for something within the department, we need a new supplier, we ask ourselves, is there any personal data? Is it commercially sensitive? And are they using DWP assets? Now, if the answer is no to all those three questions, then we still want to make sure that the security angle is there and that we make sure that there is governance around it. But it's not one of our main priorities. Our main priorities is if there is personal data and if it's commercially sensitive, etc., etc. So we aren't saying that if the answer is no there, we don't worry about it. We do, but we have to prioritise. As Mike alluded to earlier, we have, I think something like, what was the figure now? 9,000 contracts. It's huge, suppliers. So we have to prioritise somewhere. So that initial triage helps us determine what level we need to go to and at what stage. I think then we go to a tiering questionnaire in as much as there is a number of questions around what that supplier is doing for us, and we put them into one of 4 tiers, one being the use of the most sensitive data, the bigger the contract presumably, or the risks entailed within it are greater. So once we've determined which tier that supplier would fit into, that will lead us to another set of questions that would determine the security requirements that they need to adhere to in order then to tender for our business. So I think it's very much those stages of where we get to understand, so that our suppliers, when they're looking to engage with us, they know exactly what their requirements would be. Because we get to the security schedule one in the middle, it's around, depending on the tier, would give us an indication, gave them an indication of exactly what our requirements are. And within that, we would also say that we'd have a right to audit. So at any point, we would be able to visit or go to them and talk to them around what the security requirements are for that. Then we move through to the assurance review and reporting, which is again talking to them around how we would manage that, understand where they're up to, and we also want to do this so that we're giving not just the big suppliers the chance to bid for our work. We want to include SMEs in this, so we need to manage this so that the tiers are fair to everyone, that we're giving people the opportunity to say, look, if you haven't got this now, can you work towards it? Is this something you can do? So it isn't that we're managing this so that we end up with only the very big people that can bid for this because they're the only people who've got the resource to do it. We do try and make this a fair opportunity so that when we get to the invitation to tender stage, people aren't restricted, that they can see what they need to work to. I'm just kind of going to pause there for a second, and I wondered if anybody's got any questions on that process and how we do that initial stage. Hello?
Maybe the main difference between the blue and the red phase.
The blue and the red?
Words.
I think the initial triage for us is for us to determine our priority. So if there is personal data, obviously that's a greater priority to us. As Mike said, we hold the records of every UK citizen. So if we're going to be dealing with a supplier who's got access to that, that means they're a bigger priority for us to ensure the security is as good as it can possibly be. So the triage is just for us to get a feel for where that potential contract with that supplier would sit. So then we go to the triage system in the red area. That's very much around putting them into the category that clearly will then push them towards what the actual specific requirements would be. Does that make sense?
So it's the same set of
They're different questions.
fundamental things.
The first
but on a
triage
higher
is
level
very
first.
basic, and then we go into more detail as we wiggle along. Okay, so I think the next one is around the process for the ongoing. Now, as I alluded to earlier, we have got a lot of suppliers that we have contracts with already. So we are reviewing those on an ongoing basis, and we very much appreciate now that some of them, we want them to adhere to certain security requirements that may not have been clear in the original contract. So we've got to plan and scope for that to help them get to the level we want them to be, but appreciate when they bid for the contract and won that contract, those specifics weren't clear at the time, or were not maybe even considered because we ourselves didn't realise the risks surrounding that at that given time. So we've very much got two focus areas here. One is the pre-contract and making sure that new suppliers are able to meet our requirements, but then there's also a huge number of contracts that we have that we want to assure ourselves that they have the good security governance around them and that they are not vulnerable to being manipulated through the supply chain. So there is an awful lot of work going on to understand how we can manage that. As I said earlier, we've got people in first line doing work with the pre-contract area. Now we've also got the second line that we are trying now to work with first line to make sure that those contracts are as secure as they can be. But I think what I need to emphasise here, and I think I tried to say this earlier, is we are only looking at the security element here. That's our job. As a certain line of defence, it's the security structure that we're looking at. So our input is to a bigger picture, because a supplier may have tick all the boxes in that they will provide exactly what DWP needs, but they may be lacking in some of the security elements. We have to flag that up, and then bigger decisions are made as a result. It's not our decision to determine whether that contract, that supplier is given. It's very much around us feeding that information in for that bigger question to be answered. So we want to have the right to audit, we want to be able to negotiate and talk to them and give them clear demarcations of exactly what DWP's expectations are from a security perspective. But it's still part of a much bigger picture. We can make sure that we provide that information so the person within DWP who's responsible for that contract, with that supplier, understands clearly if there are any shortfalls or concerns that need to be addressed, and know exactly what they can do to work with that supplier for them to be able to achieve the level of security that we feel is appropriate. I don't want to sit here and go through every step, but is there anything there that particularly somebody wants to ask me about? I'm conscious that I don't want to just sit and go through every line. It's more about giving you an indication of how very much we see the importance of this supplier assurance from a security perspective. We want to be able to show the department that we are working with first line and second line to give that assurance that our contracts and our suppliers understand their obligations and their role within the security arena. Hello.
There was some discussion around metrics and measurements around processes. Can you hint on what kind of measurements or reporting you have on this?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're providing a dashboard for senior management to outline metrics such as the maturity rating of that area. So if we've got a supplier that we've had for, 2 years, what is their maturity level that we've got? So we can show them, we give them we do a lot of assessment and give them a risk score that says that they're, there's still work to be done, or they've done everything we want them to, so that we're working towards this. We're not there yet, I'll be honest with you. This dashboard is something we're planning to do, is so that we can show senior management exactly where our suppliers are, where we think there are any gaps, and how we can then work with them to cover those gaps if we feel it's necessary. There may be that, depending on what the contract's for, and back to the original where we talked about the tiers, if it's a tier 4 and they don't meet the same criteria as somebody in tier 1, it may be that we've decided that's not necessary. We don't need that level of control for a tier 4 where we do as a tier 1. Anyone else? I think just, our journey is very much around understanding how we work together on this. It's just that the security element, as I've said, forms part of a bigger commercial decision-making process. But it's key to keeping the department secure, to making sure that we're not vulnerable through our supply chain and that we are covering all angles to ensure that security is a risk-based approach, hence the tiering and understanding where our risks are, but also that we work with our colleagues to be as secure as we can be. I'm going to open it up for further more questions if anybody has any. Mike, is there anything I've missed that you wanted to add?
I don't think so.
Oh, I knew there'd be a question. Yes, sir.
In such a Jane, Mike, thank you very much. In such a huge scale enterprise, what is the biggest challenge in delivering an effective supplier assurance process?
For me, it's the buy-in across the department, that people who are going out there to negotiate new contracts engage with security, to know that commercials are now very much working with us. We've got staff working in the first line to help us get, so that before they get to that contract stage, commercials are working to look at what security is needed. We created something what we call a security schedule that is part of every contract within the department. And depending on the tier that we put them in, depends how much of that schedule somebody is expected to adhere to. But it comes down to communication, and that suppliers understand what the requirements are and where they need to be in order to gain that contract with us. And to me, the biggest challenge is that we are clear and open in our tendering, that they understand what their obligations are, and that we are fair and open in our competition. And we, as I said earlier, we're not restricting it to the big guys, if you like, and the SMEs are, it's very much a government prerogative that SMEs are able to bid for government contracts. So we don't want to put them out of scope before they've even started. But it's very much, for me, the challenge is getting that right, and the communication, and that we work together. Hence my GRC angle on this, that we've got all aspects and all areas and teams within the department coming together to make this work right, rather than working in silos and things getting missed.
Thank you. My name is Murat. I'm from Union Investment, a German fund management company. First of all, I'm really deeply impressed of your involvement from the second line perspective in this contractual stages which you have just shown.
Thank you.
Because what I see, I spent before my time at Union Investment 10 years with PwC in Germany, and I've noticed that most of the second lines are not involving that much, and leave it to the first line of defense, which leads to a very low velocity when it comes to involving the when it comes to getting better as a company. So the second lines sometimes are seen as showstoppers, and they don't want things to get forward. What should I, as one of the first line, do to get the second line giving this involvement and enforcement when it comes to suppliers?
Good question. I think that's quite difficult for me to answer because as second line, I know what I need to do. So I'm kind of concerned that your second line are not seeing the need for this. I suppose to me it is reporting up to board level. If the board can see the areas of concern, the gaps, they should be then asking those questions. But again, I feel for me, as second line, the route way is through me up to the board. First line, in my experience, don't always want to show where their gaps are. So it's very much for me, as first line, you're accountable. Second line is just around giving you that insurance. So if you, in first line, take on that accountability and make it happen, you should, in theory, be giving very little for second line to actually do. Did you want to say something?
May I add something? Because I think it's a very good question. This is like any area of security, whether your first line is in commercials, whether your first line is in digital, whether it's in estates, it's physical security. This is around collaboration at the earliest possible stage that you can do. So if something does jump out of you, it shouldn't be a surprise in second line. You should embed and work together with the first line, educate. So if there is a specific training session, for example, on the latest encryption standard, then both the first and second line should be involved in it. So you've built that relationship up right from the very start. You know, and in the lines of defence model, there's nothing to say that if done correctly, you can't swap people about. As long as you get your delineation correct, the lines, the reporting lines are correct, people can work across the lines and share their experiences, share their knowledge, and then when it does come up and you get audited in third line, everything's fine. Does that help?
I think because we've seen that there were gaps in our commercial space that we wanted them to be more involved, the pre-contract stage, we actually seconded some people into first line to work with them, independently of us, but with our knowledge and experience, to help them get to that right level so that they understand what they need to do going forward, so that when we come to do the assurance, we've got that balance. Anybody else got a question?
Hi. Do you envisage a time that you would use metric stream to automate some of these parts of the steps of the process that you had in the wiggly worm?
I think yes, because that's the future, that the automation of these things is. We have some systems already within our commercial space that does some level of triage in regards to where we're at with the contracts. However, there is the third-party risk management application in MetricStream. We are a customer of MetricStream. We have a number of applications already. We are looking to utilise that for the future. But again, we're still on our GRC journey. We're not there yet. We're embracing it. We're trying to work on it. So yes, we do see the value, and it comes back to the question around reporting and the MI. We'd very much like to see that there is more information put into the third-party risk management application that will give us far better reporting so that we can show to the board and to senior level what the situation is around our supplier and the assurance from a security perspective. Thank you. Okay, is there any... Oh.
So obviously with third parties, once you bring them on board, particularly in the security area, things change a lot, right? Do you have does DWP use any other kind of monitoring tools to understand what might be happening in their networks or things like that that could alert you to change in their risk profile?
I think we are not as mature as we'd like to be in that space, but being already in that risk space, doing a lot of risk assessments with innovation and new ways of working, we do look at new projects and new innovation that is replacing old systems and old contracts. So therefore, by default, we know about things that are coming along, and we can do the risk-based approach to that, and that can alert us. But again, that comes back to our GRC and people working together, not in silos. And I'll be honest, there is work to be done in that space. But I think we are working towards it, and we are in a far better place than we were a few years ago. But yes and no, if that makes sense.
Was your question specific to supplier assurance or security in general in this respect of the tooling?
So primarily security around the supplier. You know, there are tools out there that will monitor your suppliers for you and alert you. That's what
So as a government department, we work very closely with the National Cyber Security Centre, who have the toolings. So for example, about 18 months ago, there was something called APT-10, which was Advanced Persistent Threat 10, which was a targeted attack on managed service providers. We were alerted to that, as major organisations were, through NCSC. We also have our own Cyber Resilience Centre that monitor the threat landscape and feed into us. So from a cyber, just to add to what Jane said, we don't do this in isolation. We use all the threat intelligence available to us, whether that's from our colleagues or through our direct relationship with the National Cyber Security Centre, and we encourage all our suppliers to be members of the National Cyber Security Scheme that also alerts them to the latest threats.
Thank you, Stuart. Okay, I'm conscious of time here. If anyone's got one more question, if not, I'll say thank you very much for attending. I do appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.